My name is Stefania Moruzis. I'm a product manager at Expedia Group, specifically focusing on our loyalty program. And today I'm going to be covering some key topics. Understanding what your problem is, refining to find the next best solution, and executing. I'm going to be using travel as an example throughout because I work for a travel company, but also it's something I believe we can all relate to. So, understanding your problem. Planning a roadmap is basically a long and never-ending path. And one of the key things you need to do is review your inputs. What do I mean by that? So there are key elements that build the foundations of your roadmap. That is your company goals, the direction your company is going in, your team structure, so how your team works, and your inputs. And say for today's presentation's sake, we already have our company goals defined, we already have our team structure defined. Today we're going to be focusing on inputs. So inputs help define outcomes. What are inputs? Inputs can be anything from prototype validations to customer feedback, to internal feedback, to product data, how are your customers interacting with your product, to customer data, who are your customers, why are they using your product? And these help create all these outcomes, which are your problems, your solution, and potential added value. So let's take an example here. We have a travel company website, and we have all our inputs, and these start catalyzing a narrative. So my company goal is to increase customer conversion by X%. Our customers are telling us they have so many choices, they really don't know what's best for them. Our product data is saying that we have a lot of, a high bounce rate on our checkout page. And internal feedback is indicating that our operations team are flooded with calls from customers pre-checkout. So customers, before they're checking out, are having a lot of questions and calling in our operations team. Our customer data indicates that our customers tend to book last-minute holidays. That's who you're trying to solve for. That's your target audience. And all these start generating ideas. You have all these inputs, you have all this information. Now you're starting to get an idea of what your potential solution is. So what's next? A brainstorming session. A brainstorming session with other team members. It could be other product teams, it could be UX, marketing, dev, data science, finance. And the aim of this is to understand what your problems are, review and set your KPIs, and come up with potential solutions. Now, this part is really important. I'll tell you why. I really believe that getting kind of other team members and other departments onboarded into your vision at a very early stage is important because they need to feel empowered and they need to buy into the strategy that you're about to build. So kind of working from the beginning with the relevant teams who may also have great inputs is really, really important. So you have now had your planning session, your brainstorming session. You know what your goal is. The next thing is building a business case. And this is kind of something that I'll touch upon a bit more later, but the importance of building a business case. Because essentially, anything you add to your roadmap is an investment, no matter how big or small. So you need to make sure that you're building a case for it. So you have your goal, as I mentioned earlier, you have your problem, you now have a KPI, which is to reduce bounce rate by 10%. And one of your solutions is supporting our users to know what the best accommodation is for them. They're last-minute bookers, they're in a hurry, they're probably more time sensitive and kind of like they need the supports to find the best accommodation for them. So what I've kind of covered so far is that planning your roadmap isn't simply just attending a meeting with all the relevant stakeholders where you sit for 2 hours and whoever screams the loudest ends up getting the items prioritized on the roadmap. Planning your roadmap takes a lot of prep work, and depending on the size of the company you work for or the company that you own, you could maybe take 2-3 weeks to prepare for the planning session. So I've showed you kind of like the research that a PM does, the brainstorming session and involving other individuals from an early stage, identifying opportunities, and then I'll be discussing the next two later on in my presentation. But what's really important is that you do the upfront work. And I think a lot of PMs make that mistake. They don't do the upfront work. And now that you kind of have all these foundations and you have all these inputs, how do you know what's next? How do you know what's right for your business? And that brings me onto my next subject, pardon me, which is refining to find the best solution. So in my previous slides, I was kind of indicating that there's a lot of inputs into creating ideas and generating ideas for what a roadmap should have. What are the items that you should add to your roadmap? And you have teams within your company that are, like strategy, finance, trying to find initiatives to improve your processes. And then you have feedback. And so as a PM, what do you do? What do? You have all this information, you have all this input. How do you know what's right? A product manager sits actually just there. Your job is to be the funnel. It's to ask why. Why am I going to add this to my roadmap? What benefit is it going to give to my company? And in a lot of companies, funnily enough, dev is like often seen as kind of a bottleneck. It's often seen as something that like blocks a lot of progression within the company. But in my opinion, we're as a team, product managers, the fact that we are have such kind of limited resources, it's a blessing in disguise. Because if we were to continuously change based on new customer feedback, new data, our company strategy would be diluted, and the company would lose focus. So the fact that we have to really funnel everything and find the best next thing means that we are really making sure to keep the company's strategy a key focus and balancing the long term and the short term. So how do we do this refining? Because I've spoken a lot about refining. You're probably wondering, how do we do this? Well, we go back to our previous example where we have the business case problem and we have a potential solution. Now, what I like to do is I like to map everything on a table. And there's so many ways, oh, sorry, it's cropped at the top, but I hope you can read it. I'll also go over it in a second. There's so many ways that different PMs actually go through the prioritization process. A lot of them like to use graphs. There's actually really no right or wrong answer. But what I like to do is I like to have all the information in one place in front of me so that I can compare features like for like. Because you'll have a request from the marketing team. You have a request from the finance team, and kind of the solutions that you're looking at may be extremely different. So comparing everything like for like helps kind of you make this prioritization process. So what I like to do, I put down my solution, I write down my dependencies. What other teams do I depend on to kind of get this feature live, or to solve this problem, excuse me. And I just want to note, every single dependency you have is additional complexity, no matter how big or small. Even if you just want one team to just change one line of code in their data, you have to understand that every team means that they need to get sign off from their stakeholders, that they need to make decisions. So no matter how big or small, bear in mind, one dependency equals additional complexity. You then look at your anticipated impact. So what KPIs are you going to be moving by developing the solution? And then, of course, your kind of financial value, so your GP per annum. And I think regardless of what size company you work for, what you do, the most important thing and what everybody wants in the end of the day is to either make money or save money. And so it's important to kind of highlight how you're gonna execute that. So let's say, based on the fact that we had an idea that we will help our users find the best next accommodation for them. These are potential solutions. We build a chatbot. The dependency for this is customer operations team, because we need ops to kind of support us in doing this. Our anticipated impact is to reduce calls by 10% and increase conversion by 8%, and therefore the GP per annum is 3 million. And you do the same for kind of your other ideas. So you have, improved search filters. For that, you will need data science and business development, because in order to improve kind of the filters that customers can apply, you need an algorithm to kind of optimize the search based on who's searching. You need business development or your sales team who are onboarding hotels to get all the relevant information from them. And the output of that is you increase conversion by 7%, and you have a GP of 1 million per annum. And the last is you added suggestions for use section. We all watch Netflix, I assume. On Netflix, there's kind of like, this is what we recommend for you. Doing something similar on our wonderful travel site that we've supposedly built. And for that, you require data science. You expect to increase conversion by 11% and partner revenue by 5%. And this is kind of your financial value. But we want to take this a step further and kind of quantify it even more, because there's a mixture of information here. And then what I like to do is kind of score this information. So what do I mean by that? Your benefit is kind of the contribution to your GP. So how much is that feature going to contribute to your GP? And in my instance, I've kind of rated it out of 5. Your complexity is how complex is this feature, and therefore your benefit and complexity is your ROI. Greater complexity means the longer you'll see your ROI. So you have your additional complexity, and this can be something that you can do with your dev teams. You just, you kind of have a casual conversation. You're like, I want to build this awesome chatbot. How complex do you think it's going to be based on other features that we've done? And you can just ask your dev team to kind of t-shirt size it, small, medium, large. And based on that, you just input your figures here. And then the last kind of weighting that I consider is important when making a decision of what is important to put on my roadmap is understanding the priority levels. This does vary company on company. Like, I used to work in a startup before I worked in Expedia group, and for us there was like a lot of features that were nice to have, and a lot of features that were solving serious business problem, and we're going to reduce our cash burn and help our operations, like streamline our operations essentially. So that's your priority level. If you don't develop this feature in the next 6 months, are you going to stagnate your company's growth? Are you going to cause any potential issues? Or is it kind of a nice to have feature, which is, yeah, okay, it's gonna like make our users a bit happier, but is it really solving a business problem that's important to you? And in bigger companies that have more budget, the priority level may have less kind of weighting. So that brings me on to the next part, the overall score and the weighting of that. So I've kind of built an overall. I tend to build a formula to kind of predict to calculate, the overall score. But the weighting of your overall score really depends on the company and your kind of your situation. So, for example, if you work in a company where dev resources are really, really tight, the weighting on complexity is probably going to be extremely different to if you're working in a company where your resources are not. And again, as I mentioned previously, with the priority level, this is going to seriously impact if you're working in a company where the level of priority and getting something live is extremely important in terms of it kind of trumps all other benefits. That's something where you can adjust your weighting on. So then you've come up with your overall score, and this is my overall score based on the formula that I created for the kind of benefits of all these features. But if only it ended there. I mean, if it did end there, probably all product managers would be out of a job, because we just put a few numbers in a table, calculates, okay, looks like we have 2 kind of contestants here. And no, it doesn't end there. Being a PM involves balancing the qual and the quant. There's the art and the science of technology. What I mean by that, you're not only going to look at kind of like, you're not going to only put a number to your features. You also need to look at what your competitors are doing. What themes continue to reoccur? And I'm going to emphasize on this word themes, like theming your kind of your problems is a really good way in kind of helping your team stay focused. I'll speak about that more later. And will this feature impact multiple stakeholders? Because, for example, the chatbot feature will not only impact conversion and potentially it will impact operations, it will impact multiple other teams. So it's just also knowing what feature is going to impact other teams and potentially have a greater effect. So the qual and the quant. And I'm going to go back to our travel example. When you're planning a trip, you look at the qual and the quant. You look at what the hotels are saying, what your friends are doing on Instagram. You look at the quantitative. How do I get from X to Y? What is my budget? And I just want to emphasize that these are kind of like the 2 things that you always need to keep balanced when planning a roadmap. So the next step is your roadmap planning session. It's finally come. And there's a lot of companies that like use a planning session to literally, it can last for hours and hours in some companies. And the reason why I've showed everything that I've showed is because I really want to emphasize the importance of prep work and the importance of having your business case ready. That's essentially what you're doing. You're building mini business cases for every single feature you're about to prioritize, and you're presenting that to your stakeholders so that they can decide what's the next best thing for your company. And by doing that, you're not only bringing focus to this meeting, you're also probably reducing the time that it takes to come to a decision significantly. So you come prepared, you have the relevant individuals and stakeholders in your product planning meeting, depending on what company you work in, maybe different. And you then identify that based on all these options, this is kind of my next best solution. And you add these to your roadmap for Q3 and Q4. And you theme these. I'm sorry, the presentation is cut, but what that says is the theme is to reduce bounce rate. And that's kind of, these are all the kind of potential solutions to that theme, and each theme creates an outcome. Each theme you want kind of like an outcome and a goal. So what I've done here is I've added everything to our kind of like fake little roadmap. And something else I've added here, some figures which I'm just going to talk about very briefly, is there's a lot of times when you're planning a roadmap, it's really difficult to anticipate how many kind of work streams you can take on as a team. And what's really important is to know your team capacity and your team velocity. How fast can you do? How fast are your developers kind of building and releasing? Excuse me. So, but if you know your kind of your velocity, you then, by understanding kind of the size of your project, which you can do by looking at previous projects that you've worked on and the size of those projects, or by again having a conversation with your dev team, you can kind of estimate what level of capacity each project is going to take for your developers. And why I'm saying this is because a lot of the times projects end up being so much more complicated than we ever think. There's no such thing as like, oh yeah, let's quickly fix this button. No, everything is connected to a database, which is connected to a service, which is connected to something else. There's never going to be a quick fix. So it's always good to just be realistic about kind of what you're capable of doing and and kind of like the expected work for a feature or solution that you're looking to develop. And we're done. Well, almost. So now it's about executing. And I think this is a really, really massive conversation or presentation in itself. So I'm going to just cover some basics. So before we begin, let's define what a roadmap is. A roadmap is a tool to communicate your strategy. It helps you set an end goal, and helps you build your vision. And with that, you create outcomes. Outcomes, it's a very important word. And there's a lot of frameworks that support you executing your roadmap. And this is kind of one of the main ones that is such a huge buzzword that everyone's speaking about, agile. And I just want to emphasize a couple of things here. Agile is not for everyone. If you have a company where you have if you work in a very regulated industry, for example, or you have a company where you're a SaaS and you have a very specific solution you're trying to build, Agile may not be for you. It's really, really important that you understand if Agile is the right methodology for your team or not. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that there's a very fine line with using Agile methodologies and kind of being Agile and losing focus. While being Agile allows you to be flexible, innovative, and have faster release cycles, sometimes it creates lack of focus, uncertainty, and frequent changes. And again, this is kind of your role as a PM to make sure that you're balancing the long term and the short term, and you're balancing, the changes that may happen within your sprint cycles with kind of what your end goal is. So long-term strategy, feature releases, kind of that balance. It's really important to maintain that. And how do you do that? So let's take this example. I have my problem, again, the original example. We have high bounce rate on the checkout page. I'm sure you could all like regurgitate this whole presentation by now. We want to reduce bounce rate by 10%. We have our solution. We begin designing and developing, but things happen. Our roadmap is never predictable. You can I don't think I've ever worked in a company where we're like, okay, we're going to execute feature X and it's going to be executed by this time and it's actually gone through. There's always going to be blockers, things that come out from Q&A, feedback that you may not have expected. You may have seen things when you started testing that you didn't expect either. And data may give you insights into information that's making you kind of want to change your direction. And data, actually, I just want to focus on this, is kind of a double-edged sword right now, because while data gives us so much transparency and the ability to really focus is the wrong word, but to really understand what users are doing and what our problems are, it also kind of creates a lot of chaos sometimes, because you have data that is streaming every day on a live basis and your metrics are constantly fluctuating and changing, and that can actually kind of divert you from your end goal. So it's kind of, again, important to maintain that focus. So you've come across this big blocker, this issue. You go back and you iterate. That's fine. Iterating is, you should iterate. You shouldn't like commit to something, and even if you see the results that you see, you just, you refuse and you're like, nope, this is what I'm going to deliver. Iterating is actually is really, really important, because that means that you're receptive to customer feedback and you're receptive to kind of environmental factors. But you have to stick to your roots and your origins. And by theming your work, as I mentioned previously, so you have your themes. This kind of allows you to always return back to the foundation. So your theme is to kind of reduce bounce rate. You've come up with a solution, that's not worked, fine. You go back, you iterate, but you always kind of focus in on that theme and on that end goal. And I'm going to use one last travel example, I promise. So, say you are going to Greece, aka your strategy, and you want to go to the Acropolis while you're in Greece. And Greece is the best country in the world. You're in Greece, and well, in Athens specifically, if you want to go to the Acropolis, and you realize that you're there, and the tubes, there's a strike on the tubes, and you check Uber, and there's a 2.5 storage, and you're like, okay, I don't have the budget for this either. So you may have to divert your strategy. You may have to maybe walk to the Acropolis, go another day, etc. That's fine. But you go to the Acropolis. You focus on that end goal, even if the path that you take to get there is not what you originally planned. And that's what I was trying to get to with all those weird diagrams that I had on my previous slides. And yeah, actually, I forgot that this was the conclusion slide already. So, the key learnings from this presentation. We've gone over how to understand your problem and gather all the relevant information. Refine your options by building these mini business cases that I discussed. And execute while balancing the long-term vision and the short-term benefits. And I'm going to end on this statement. Your roadmap is not a release plan. It is a living prioritization sequence of problems you are trying to solve.